Testing, 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me now? All right. We'll start over then. Let's remember everybody that's on our sick list. Got notified this morning that Tina had been taken back to the emergency room. She's now home. But the only thing on the note that we got was that her veins or arteries or both were dilated. So there's a multitude of reasons that can happen. So at least let's keep them in our prayers. They're trying to take care of the situation. Keep Brother Clonch in our prayers. He finally got his transfusion this past week. Kevin Moody is not doing, his new medicine is not working, so he's not having too good a day today. He's going to miss. So, but it's good to see the rest of the Moody's here. And the Halls, the shots went well. Less pain, but still we need to keep that family in our prayers. Anybody else?
Barbara Little. I sent out an email to her this morning. She had been in the ER last night and they wanted to admit her. She was having some heart problems.
Barbara Little, email went out this morning that I haven't checked my email, so I didn't know it, but she was at the ER and she's having some heart issues, and they're going to be admitting her to the hospital. So let's keep her in our prayers. Anything, anybody else? No. Oh, that's right. We need to keep all the campers in our thoughts and prayers because Will and them are going to be up there. No, keep them in our prayers because they're going to be traveling and working with the campers and all. So they're going to have their hands full, I'm sure. This is your second year, right? Brother Bobby Mong, would you lead us in a prayer, please?
Let's pray. Father God, we thank you for the blessing this day, this time we have to study thy word. We pray for those who have been mentioned here that you would put your healing hand upon them and bring them a measure of comfort and help. That will pray for the speaker of the hour, that he will have a ready recollection of the lesson that he studied, and that it be a blessing to us all. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. If you're trying to follow along and get prepared for our Bible studies, according to the list that was out, today we're going to be talking about David becoming king, and the reference was 1 Samuel chapter 31, the first 6 verses, and then skip back to chapter 19. But as I started looking at it, I thought I needed to do something a little bit different. If you recall, last week at the end of the class, we had left off on chapter 26 with the last verse there saying that David went his way and Saul returned to his place. And this is after David had showed that he could have killed him but didn't harm him. And Brother Clonch had made the comment that, well, by them going their separate ways here, David knew Saul's heart and knew that if he went back with him, he would be killed, and that's exactly where the next chapter picks up, and I think that we need to look at that and go through a few things as we get to David becoming king. I have a habit of going through my Bible when I'm reading something or find something interesting. I will highlight it or underline it or sometime both, sometime even draw arrows to make sure I bring that one back to my attention. Problem is, over the next 3 chapters, about everything, every page is half highlighted. So I'm going to try to skip some of that and just hit the major points. But I think we need to look at starting with verse 1 of chapter 27. And David said in his heart, I shall now perish one day by the hand of Saul. There is nothing better for me than that I should speedily escape into the land of the Philistines, and Saul shall despair of me, to seek me any more in any coast of Israel, so shall I escape out of his hand. This goes along with what was said last week, that David knew that Saul was, for lack of better terms, schizophrenic. One moment he's lucid, and another moment he's out to kill David. So David not only left the presence of Saul and went someplace else, he decided his safest venture would be to leave the entire territory, leave the area that was under Saul's control, and go over to someplace else.
Old saying is, Saul was speaking with a forked tongue.
Saul was speaking with a forked tongue. So David arose, and he passed over with 600 men that were with him unto Achish, the son of Maoch, king of Gath. Where do we know the term Gath from, location-wise? Who else was from Gath? How about the big guy Goliath that David had killed? So they went to, and that happened to be a primary city, I'm trying to think, the capital city of that area at the time. And so he went there, and David, and verse 3 said, David dwelt with Achish at Gath, he and his men. Now here's where it gets a little bit more involved, and you really need to put all this in perspective. He not only went with the 600 men that were with him, but he and his men, every man with his household, even David with his 2 wives, of Ahinoam and the Jezreelitess, and Abigail the Carmelitess, Nabal's wife. So they're not just moving the warrior trips. And if you recall last week, I discussed how when they went out on war campaigns, that it was just not the warriors, but they had family to go along to take care of the cooking, people to repair things. So it was not just the warriors that you had to do a head count on. So here, if you have 600 men that are of fighting age, 20 plus, and how many of them will have wives? How many of them will have kids? And if you just roughly factor it out, some have more, some have less. But if you factor it out to just the fact that each one had a family consisted of 3 or 4 people in the unit, we're getting up to around 2,000 people that's moving from one location to another location and setting up. That is a massive influx of people to any community at any time. And then verse 5 says it was told Saul that David had fled to Gath, and so he didn't go after him anymore. Why do you think Saul, it'll tell us explicitly a little bit later, but right now, why do you think Saul was going to leave David alone? Was it because he liked him now? Or at least didn't hate him now? What was the primary reason that Saul would be hands off on David? David was living in the Philistines' territory, and Saul didn't want to have anything to do with them. So as long as David and his group are over there, they're in safe territory. And then David said to Achish, if I have now found grace in thine eyes, let them give me a place in some town in the country that I may dwell there, for why should thy servant dwell in the royal city with thee? So David is asking Achish to give him an assigned territory that he can go to. This is sort of reminiscent, if you go back into the book of Genesis, what happened when Joseph brought his family into Egypt. They gave them an assigned territory, best of the land at the time. So apparently David has found favor in the eyes of Achish at this time, because the next verse says Then Achish gave him Ziklag that day, and wherefore Ziklag pertaineth unto the kings of Judah unto this day. Now, I didn't bring my maps with me, so I'm going to try to go back to me. And I know if I don't get confused, your east is this way and your west is this way. I'll try to keep that in mind. If you recall 3 or 4 weeks ago when we discussed this basic territory, we said that Jerusalem was right here. Bethlehem was about 7 miles to the south of there. They went about 15 to 20 miles to the west where David killed Goliath, and then slightly farther west was Gath, where Goliath had lived. He was from the place of Gath. Now, David has been at Gath, and now they give him Ziklag, which is about 25 miles roundabout to the south of Gath. So they're still in that kind of same region, but from the Gath territory back to the Mediterranean Sea, the Great Sea, is the Philistines' territory, and then approximately, well, a little bit farther east from that over is the territory of Judah, of the Israelites. Questions, comments? Brother Clunch, you look like you got something.
Well, I was trying to go back. This is the first time that Achish and David have had an interaction back in chapter 21 where David feigned himself mad, so there may be a little bit of, hey, we'll stick him out in the country away from us because we don't want him around.
That's right, he was foaming at the mouth and carrying on. Okay. Yes, sir.
How many years are we after David killed Goliath?
I'm not sure. We've got to be down the road a ways because there's been, as we go through here, there's going to be several fights between the Israelites and the Philistines. And then as we're coming upon 3 chapters later, as we get into the very end of it, Saul is being killed by the Philistines, and then David is taken over. So it's got to be some time in between, and we really don't know, or I don't anyway, how many battles and how many times Saul, I know the times it's recorded, but how long did he hide each time? How many? There's one place in here that specifically says that he lived a year and 4 months in this area before he started doing something else. So
The reason I ask is it doesn't seem long enough ago in any case for them to have just forgotten or, so here he is he is more welcome there than with his own people. That's
right,
amazing.
right.
Just walks into a capital city with 600 fighting men and they don't flinch, I know that's probably not quite how they found it. It just seems like there wouldn't be quite welcoming for him.
Well, I'm sure I have no basis of knowledge. It's just my assumption from other things I'm read on different things. I'm pretty sure that David had sent out notice that we're coming. You just don't show up on somebody's doorstep with,
But even still,
yeah,
it's amazing.
it is, absolutely. And I think we'll see how that sort of gels together as we go along, because in the next verse it says, at the time David dwelt in the country of the Philistines a full year and 4 months. That's one verse later. And then David and his men went up and invaded the Geshurites and the Gazrites and the Amalekites, for those nations were of the old inhabitants of the land, as thou goest ashore even unto the land of Egypt. So back to my map up here, Ziklag, all of this took place south. South, the farther south you go, you get into Egypt. So the area they're fighting in now is a little on the south side of Ziklag. And then David smote the land, left nobody alive. Verse 10 is very interesting. Achish said, whither have ye made a road today? What does that mean? Whither have you made a road today, or else where did you make a road today? And then David responded to him after that against the south of Judah and against the south of the Jerahmeelites and against the south of the Kenites. David responds to him and tells him where, but what is Achish talking about when he said, where have you made a road today?
It says raid.
Raid today? Okay. Why did he put in the phrase today? Would that not indicate that that David wasn't just sitting over there for a year and 4 months doing nothing? That he was occasionally going out and doing things, and so Achish was just saying, okay, where you been today? I mean, wouldn't we do the same thing? I know when I was growing up, a teenager, well, I'm going to pick on David Howard. If I met you on the street in Huntsville, Alabama, and said, where you been spelunking today? What would that tell you about us? That I knew you was a spelunker and it wasn't the first time, so where'd you go today? So I think that's what it boils down to. Anybody else got a opinion, a question, comment? Okay. And then David didn't leave anybody alive. That sounds kind of harsh, but what was the instructions when they first were to go into that land? They were to destroy everything at that time. So Achish believed David, saying, he hath made his people Israel utterly to abhor him, therefore he shall be my servant forever. There's a fancy word that I don't like, but I'm going to use it anyway, which I think fits here, that it appears as though at this point David had ingratiated himself to Achish. And the reason I don't like that word is that it takes on the appearance of putting on airs to gain favor. But here it seems like David was just doing David's thing, and Achish approved of it.
Don't we use, even in modern times, the enemy of my enemy is my friend?
The enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? Anything else on chapter 26, or 7, excuse me. Then as we go into 28, then it says, and it came to pass in those days that the Philistines were gathering an army together. They was ready to go fight the Israelites again. And here's something I'm going to put a question out. I'm not going to answer it. I want you to answer it. David is getting ready to go out with Achish, a Philistine, and fight against the Israelites. David is an Israelite. David has already been appointed to be king of the Israelites. And now he is ready to go with the Philistines and fight against his own people that he is to become king of. Explain. And this is where it's your turn to talk. I'm sorry?
He spent this last year convincing the Philistines he's on their side. He can't suddenly say, oh, never mind, I'm not going to come with you to war. So he's playing both sides, and up to a certain point, he's got to play it out as he thinks.
Okay, so he's playing both sides against the middle, right? Okay, Brother Golden, you had a hand. That was your comment?
He was giving the impression he was with the Philistines, but I think he was secretly doing away with some of the Philistines.
Okay.
I don't think he really was wanting to just fight the Israelites.
Okay.
Giving that Achish the impression.
We got to remember one thing for absolute fact, though. David is following whose plan? God's plan. So then as they go and get together, the rest of the princes and the Philistines, they don't like the idea that David is going with them because of the very reason that was cited by Alyssa and Brother Golden, that they think that he is not trustworthy, that he's going to turn on them. So then they tell Achish that they have to send his group away, that they're not going to allow them to participate in the battle, which means that everything now is working according to plans. Questions, comments down through about verse 9 or so? Not verse 9, but verse 8, 7, 6. Yes, ma'am.
Somewhat disagree with the statement of David just following God's plan. I feel like this is one of these, he's trying to take it into his own hands. Just as much as anybody lies to fulfill God's plan in their mind, there was a way they could do it without sinning. So obviously God hasn't removed his favor from David. He's taking care of it. But David's making choices that God doesn't agree with.
Okay, so you think at this point David's out on his own?
Not necessarily going to the Philistines was wrong, but he's lying about who he's fighting against. And we know that God's not going to approve of lying in any circumstance. So David's helping the plan as much as Abraham did, or Rahab lied to hide the spies. They had good motives, but they chose to do it their way rather than sticking with God's plan at every step.
Okay. I got to chew on that one for a while, but so we get down to the point now where verse 7 said that then said Saul unto his servants, seek out a seer or somebody that can tell the future, because in verse 5 Saul had seen the host of the Philistines and he was afraid, and his heart greatly trembled. When he inquired of the Lord didn't respond. Why didn't the Lord respond to him? He had already given him up chapters ago. So now he seeks out a woman or seeks out a person to tell him what's going to happen. And when they find the woman, she doesn't want to participate at first because what had Saul done?
Put to death all the familiar spirits.
Right.
Which is,
He had put that thing to the side. You won't do it or you die. And now he's going to try to find out what's going on. If we skip down to verse 16, it says then, this is after Saul told the woman that he wanted her to call up Samuel. In verse 16 it says, then Samuel, wherefore then dost thou ask of me, seeing the Lord is departed from thee and is become thine enemy? So Samuel just reiterates the fact that, Saul, you've already been told, Lord's not on your side anymore. Verse 17, the Lord hath done to him as he spake by me, for the Lord hath rent the kingdom out of thine hand and given it to thy neighbor, even to David. And here's the reasons behind it. It's been stated before, but he's stating it again for Saul. Because thou obeyest not the voice of the Lord, nor executest his fierce wrath upon Amalek, therefore hath the Lord done this thing unto thee. Moreover, the Lord will also deliver Israel with thee into the hand of the Philistines. Next section is very important. And tomorrow shalt thou and thy sons be with me. Now he had gone to this seer or magical woman to try to find out what was going to happen. He calls on Samuel. Where is Samuel? Samuel's dead. So she's calling Samuel's spirit down to talk. Now, before we go any farther, that does not happen today. Back in those days, things happen at God's pleasure. Today, it don't happen. But
Can we talk about that a minute?
I don't think it happened much then either, because it surprised her when he actually showed up.
pardon?
It surprised her when he actually showed up, so I don't think it really happened much then.
Well, what I'm referring to is God at that time did speak to people in various and sundry ways. But yeah. So here she tells him that tomorrow, he says, tomorrow you'll be with me, which means that if he's already crossed over to the other side, what's going to happen tomorrow with Saul and his sons? They're going to die.
There's an interesting kind of complexity here, because the lady tells Saul, hey, Saul, obviously Saul is disguised at this point, she doesn't recognize him. Saul has told all mediums and people like me, we've got to cut this out. We are banned from calling up dead folks and things like that. You're trying to lay a trap for me. It kind of, almost, are you a cop? Is what it kind of makes me feel like, she's asking. And then, of course, Samuel's spirit does come up, and she, like Dad said, seemed pretty surprised by that. So I don't know that she was 100% on the up and up. I'll just say that, like some of these palm readers and all that we see even today. But it's interesting that Saul had strayed that far, that, originally he had banished or banned what she did because it went against God's will, and then now he is actually seeking out help in that way. He's just strayed that far from God.
That is true, and isn't it amazing to what extent desperate people will go to do things? And I'm calling him desperate at this point. So he knows he's going to die, so that makes him extremely unhappy for a while. Won't eat, anything like that. Going over to verse 29, chapter 29, this is the section where the Philistines sent the Hebrews, the Israelites, away. And then if we go to chapter 30, we have something else that's kind of interesting here. Chapter 30, starting with verse 1 and going down, is talking about while David was away from Ziklag, that a group came in, the Amalekites came in and burned the city and took away everybody. All the wives of the soldiers, David's 2 wives, all the families, everybody was taken away. And it's very interesting here that in verse 4, it says, Then David and the people that were with him lifted up their voice and wept until they had no more power to weep. They were extremely distraught that their families had been taken. I put that before this verse I'm going to read now, verse 5, where David's wives, and we're going to go to verse 6. David was greatly distressed, for the people spake of stoning him. How many of you had caught that verse before in reading through this? That David's people were on the verge of discussing stoning him. Why would they do that when he was going to be anointed king? He was the chosen one to be king. He was the one that they had followed in all these battles. You said something, Jeremy? No?
At that point in time, they were distraught because their family. Now, I guess you'd say, here's where the rubber hits the road. The king led us out there to be with the Philistines, and we come home and all our stuff is gone. Whose fault is it?
That's right. Who you going to blame? And they blamed David for it. But then David, the other interesting part of that is the last part of the verse. It says, David encouraged himself and the Lord his God. So David was in despair. All his people were in despair. But he went to the Lord for his comfort. And then he asked God the question that if he should pursue, and he was told yes. And anybody remember the story from there? What happened when he went out to retrieve what was his? They got everything back. Which takes us then into chapter 31. Any questions or comments from 27 up through 30?
There's a contrast between Saul desiring some answer from God, and he gets none, no matter what he uses. But then David goes to the priest, Abiathar, and gets the answer that he wanted. So David seemingly is in a rock and hard spot because the Philistines don't trust him. Now he's fighting against the Israelites, and he has God on his side, though.
And is it not interesting that when he said, should I go up and fight, he can't do it by himself. Now where does he have to muster his forces from or get his warriors to go with him? From the people that are talking about stoning him. I just find that kind of interesting. Anything else? Anyway, he got the group together and they went and got all their property and everything back. And then,
Spent a whole day slaying these folks that had done this from twilight till the evening of the next day. A lot of retribution.
a lot of bloodshed. Right.
And the next verse is amazing to me how they point out that nothing was missing, whether small or great, a child or wife, they brought all back. As God said, you're going to get it all back.
Get it all back. Verse 1 of 31. The Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell down slain in Mount Gilboa. Now, I'm going to try to do this. I might mess it up, but we're back to my map. Remember, we had been at Jerusalem. Is where Saul was a lot of the times, but then what was his hometown? Just about 7 miles north of that, Gibeah. And now he's up at Mount Gilboa. Mount Gilboa, well, here is Judah, Jerusalem is in Benjamin, and now they're at Mount Gilboa, which is up in West Manasseh territory, another tribe's territory. So they're fighting all over that range there, chasing each other around in battle. But fell down slain in Mount Gilboa. The Philistines followed hard upon Saul and upon his sons, and the Philistines slew Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua, Saul's sons. And the battle went sore against Saul, and the archers hit him, and he was sore wounded of the archers. Then Saul said unto his armor-bearer, draw thy sword and thrust me through therewith, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and abuse me. But his armor-bearer would not, for he was sore afraid. Therefore Saul took a sword and fell upon it. Several questions come to mind here. One is Saul did not want to be slain by his enemy. He was apparently had enough knowledge about his wound to know that it was he wasn't going to recover, or else he would have told his armor bearer to charioteer, get me out of here, get me away from the fight, let me recover. but he was ready to fall on his sword and die, or somebody put him to death other than the enemy. I bring this up to some historical settings in our recent, it's history, but it's in just before my lifetime. In World War II, the Japanese, what would they do before they were captured? They would do what was called harikiri. They would kill themselves. And to me, one of the most egregious things that the Japanese did during World War II is they had so indoctrinated the people, the common people, about how horrible that the Americans were, that when this one island had been taken and the Americans were there trying to go in and take care of, we'll refer to them as the locals, the common people, that when they saw an American, they would not surrender to them or come to them. Man, woman, and child would literally run off a cliff and commit suicide because they had been so brainwashed what would happen if the enemy had captured them. And I imagine that some of that historically has some validity, because what happened during this time period in battle? Everybody was always chopping off somebody else's head and always feeding them to the dogs or feeding them to the birds of the field or scattering their bones. So you can sort of put yourself in the place of Saul and imagine why he would want to go ahead and do away with himself rather than let a vicious enemy take care of him. So why was the armor bearer, the second part of that is why was the armor bearer scared to kill Saul? Nobody be around to tell the story that he was told to do it. It sort of goes back to David also, that who are you to kill God's anointed? So, and we know what happens when David finds out other people take credit for things and things of that nature. So, but the armor bearer didn't want to have any part in it.
This armor bearer would be probably a young man, but also somebody who was very close to David and spent all of his time with Saul, and was very trusted by Saul and his family, so that he would be in that position. Probably one of the most trusted people that Saul had around him, besides maybe his wine taster or whoever, his cook, something like that. And so you can imagine that he had a love for Saul and a care for him, and that would be a very difficult situation to be put in.
Now, according to some Hebrew writings, the armor bearer is suppositioned to be Doeg. I don't hold to that, but Doeg would be one of those that was very close to Saul, as you say. But the reason that I don't think it was Doeg was because what position was Doeg in previous chapters? He's the one that turned David in, eating in the capital. So he had made an end with Saul. He was very close with Saul, but he was in charge of Saul's servants. A person that's in charge of the servants of the king, they're not going to be on the front line out there as an armor bearer, at least in my opinion. Yes, sir, brother.
I was stationed on Okinawa in my military career, and I never seen it myself, but I was told by other military people that there was a great big cliff where a bunch of the Okinawans jumped off, and some bones were still there. Most of it had been cleaned up, I was told,
Yes, sir.
because this is in line with what you was talking about a little bit ago.
Right. And that's the island I was thinking about. I just couldn't call the name right off the top of my head, but yes, sir. And we do know that several of the higher ranking officers, Japanese officers, they had been found where they had committed suicide rather than be captured.
You know, that the mothers would actually throw the ones that couldn't, toddlers.
Yeah.
Throw them off first and then jump.
Right.
And it's kind of ironic, the Japanese general and he committed suicide, and the American general, right at the very end of the war, took shrapnel in the chest and died. So they're both of them died. That's a horrible thing.
Isn't that a? So did you live that history, or you just study it like me?
I just don't look at it. Actually, 102.
So Saul fell on his sword, and when his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he likewise upon his sword and died with him. So I think this goes back to what Jeremy was saying also, that an armor bearer gets very close to the person that they're serving with and all. So when he saw that Saul was dead, he killed himself. And there could have been another ulterior motive to that too, is because they were being pressed hard by the Philistines, and what would have happened if the armor bearer had been captured? He'd been treated pretty roughly too.
So we know that the medium prophesied that Saul and his sons were going to die. Do we think that maybe that also factored into Saul's decision, because he sees his sons killed, he already knows God said he's going to die, and so he just gave up hope? I mean, rather than living, dying with honor, this seems to be part of his personality, that he would have just been like, okay, well, it was already going to happen, or something.
That could have definitely been a factor, and nowhere do we know exactly what the injury was. And there are some injuries, some wounds that are extremely painful, and there's people that, this is a little bit off topic, but not really, when I was working at the funeral home and ambulance service back in the 60s, we didn't have the ability to administer medicines and things of that nature. All we could do was do the best we could to stabilize, stop bleeding, and get them to the hospital. But I have actually had people crying out in so much pain that they were ready to die and they were going to survive. You take a person that has and Brother Turner can talk about this more than I can, I guess. He's probably seen more of it, but a person that has had a major second-degree burn. Now, third-degree burn goes into destroying nerve cells and tissues, and if I'm going to have a burn, I'd rather have a third than a second, even though it's going to take longer, more chance of infection and all. But the pain a person has to go through skin grafts and reconstruction and all like that, some people would just rather give up and die. But I think the fact that he already knew that he was going to die could have come into play to say, well, let me make it sooner than later. The rest of this chapter then deals with the bell. Thank you all so much. We'll pick up and cover. We were only supposed to go through verses 1 through 6, but I'll talk about 2 minutes about the rest of the chapter next time. Thank y'all.